wanted to send a copy to was Nick Szabo. So not an easy guy to get a hold of. And so, I finally got a hold of him, his email, and I sent him the chapter that was related to him and BitGold, and just to make sure I didn't make any mistakes in my analysis of BitGold. And so, and he goes, "Oh, this book looks really good, Fred." And he goes, "Why don't we write the next one together?" So I may write the next book with Nick Szabo. But there's a chapter on Nick. There's a chapter on Wei Dai. There's a chapter on David Chaum, and so a lot of these early people, Adam Back as well, and as well as kind of post Satoshi and the block size wars. Mike Hearn, we had a conversation with. We've dove into a lot of the nitty gritty of kind of what took Bitcoin from kind of just the cyberpunk, idea, anti-government, very vague idea, to Bitcoin, And now I'm with another very OG Bitcoiner, Wayne Vaughn. We're doing a conference in Santa Monica because of this problem that you're forced to sell them at the bad points. So I think it really depends on whether you have an additional source of income or, but additional source, it doesn't really matter whether you're working or not. Like it could be a rental property, it could be something, right? But if you have some additional source of income to pay your expenses, then you can have 100% of the rest of your income in Bitcoin. Now, there's also, the Kelly criteria sort of says, there's advantages to having a little extra mathematically, because if it goes down, you buy more, and again, if you're 100% long and it goes down, you do nothing, right? And so you fail to kind of get those dips. So there really is some advantage to having some cash, and so I don't think but it doesn't mean you have to have cash in fiat. You can have Tether, for example. You can have USDC if you don't trust Tether, but a mathematical solution to that, and you can Google it. It's called the secretary problem or the marriage problem. Okay. The secretary problem is like it's a little bit. It's a little bit old school, but that's what they call it. And basically, a secretary is presented a series of candidates. Each guy comes to her and says, "This is my net worth." So the first guy comes and says, "I'm worth $250,000," and she has to decide either I marry him or I pass. And then the second guy comes and says, "I'm worth $300,000, marry, pass." And she gets to see, let's say she gets to see 100 people in her life, her dating life, right? And then the question is, at what number, how does she decide when to stop? And the answer is, roughly, she should take a third of the people and pass for the entire third. And then find out what is the maximum net worth of that first third. And then the next person who comes across who exceeds that number, marry that. Very high reason to believe that we're going to be at a minimum of 200,000 4 years out, and maybe as high as 500,000. So we have this, maybe even higher. But we have some very good statistical behavior that we can estimate based on the past statistical behavior. It's just not obvious just looking at Bitcoin, looking at the chart, trying to do technical analysis, which is generally garbage anyways. It just doesn't apply to Bitcoin. This is something very different, I think, than anything else that we've seen.
Sorry to jump in. This is super interesting, by the way. How are you planning to approach your, I suppose, DCA out? Like this thing moves crazy volatile, and you said you have in mind to start selling some at some point.
So the Kelly criterion says for tax reasons, since I'm not in Dubai, right? And the Kelly criterion is the bigger your rebalancing period, overbelief in diversification. And it's something that has been sold to us by the financial planning community, but it's and I think there are Bitcoin versus gold. That's one. Not a lot of people who are Bitcoiners do tend to diversify into gold. I think that's probably a good thing. It's more gold people who tend to go into Bitcoin, right? So I bought my gold obviously way before Bitcoin was invented, right? But other people who are gold bugs like Larry Lepard, actually have discovered Bitcoin, and they've sort of moved 50-50 or close to it, So other ones, obviously like Peter Schiff, just have resisted. They've resisted. Yeah. But I think the other thing is, there's this belief that you need to diversify in crypto. So it relies too much on validators and committees, and it's nobody's going to trust that money. The Russians will not trust American validators. The Americans will not trust Russian validators, and we're going to be in an impasse. It can't become world money. I think Russians can trust Bitcoin and Americans can trust Bitcoin. We can all trust Bitcoin. Nobody can screw around with Bitcoin. And that's because Bitcoin is that neutral level, that, every country, even if they're at war with each other, they could still agree on Bitcoin. That really makes Bitcoin completely unique. It's going to become world money.
I don't even think they compete one another. I think it's like potatoes and rocks, or grapes and whatever, bananas. I mean, now technically grapes and bananas are fruit. It's something completely different, right?
I think if you're talking about deploying great traders, in fact, we're terrible traders, generally speaking, and we should try to recognize that and trade the least possible. But it's hard. It's hard to have that temperament where you don't want to just go, okay, it's 62,000, I gotta sell. It's like, well, it's up 50% year to date. Like, what do you have? What's your complaint? There's no complaint. So
the holding part, it's so damn complicated, because in the art of no action, it requires a strong action, right? And like you said, why would I care in buying at 58, selling at 49, when I know that in 10 years we're going to 1 million? It doesn't make sense in my head either. And having a delay gratification is something these days next to impossible to find. Everything is so fast. Even emails are, down to a degree, too slow, and people don't
well,
use
listen,
them.
I feel the same way about drinking, right? So I stopped, 10 years ago, I was a pretty heavy social drinker. I love wine, fine wine. Another one that is like this, which is incredible, is like, if you take the log of Bitcoin price, okay, just take the log of Bitcoin price, right? And average out the log of Bitcoin price over 4 years. Do a simple moving average of the log of Bitcoin price, okay? And if you look at that number, it is an absolute straight line measured in log-based terms. So the average of the logs is a complete straight line with 99% R squared. So you look at this Bitcoin behavior, which I described as, well, it goes up, it goes down, it crashes, it waits for 4 years, it's dead, oh, it comes back. Now you look at it, you average it out over a 4-year period, you look at it in log space, and you get a straight line completely around the straight line with 99% R squared. Like, you would say to a normal person, you would say, who understands, had one statistics course, and you'd say, that's not possible. How can an asset have this kind of very deterministic price behavior? And the reason it is, I think 2011 or something like that. And, other than that, all their properties were seized and something by the government. But they had this Bitcoin that kind of saved them, And I think that, of course, they're now complete Bitcoin advocates, because that one investment sort of saved their family, right? But it is a virus, and that virus is spreading very mathematically, and it spreads regardless of the price of Bitcoin, right? So the adoption is continuous, whether Bitcoin goes up or down, doesn't matter. Like, there's always some new person discovering Bitcoin. Doesn't matter. Bitcoin goes up, some new person says, "What is this thing? It's going up. I heard about this Bitcoin." Bitcoin goes down, doesn't matter. Somebody says, maybe it's a good time to buy Bitcoin. So the adoption happens regardless, and it's just it's a train that can't be stopped. In Lynn Alden's words. So it can't be stopped. I think we're gonna get to that point, but how we get there, I don't know. I don't. It's like, do we get there in an easy way? Do we get there with collapse, strikes, World War III? I don't know. I just don't know what the path to getting there is. But I do feel like Bitcoin is a complete inevitability, because whether things go the good way or the bad way, people are going to want those lifeboats, and the value of a lifeboat. If you're on the Titanic and you can buy a lifeboat, the value of a lifeboat is infinite. It's everything you have, right? So you don't sit there and bargain with the guy who's got the lifeboat. So I think the lifeboats it's an incredible opportunity right now for especially young people to buy some Bitcoin. They can get to a whole Bitcoin, that's great. They get to a tenth of a Bitcoin, that's great. You know what I mean? But they should try to get some Bitcoin right now, I think. And try to ignore the price variation. That's the hard part, but they got to try to do that. And that's one thing we can kind of teach them as a little bit old OGs. We can tell people